Hi, everyone. Well, it's a real treat to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I did meet Dean Anand a couple years ago at the North Face, and I was absolutely, really impressed and thrilled to hear his vision for the business school here, especially what they're trying to do with the social entrepreneurship program. And I thought, this is something I need to stay connected with. So it's a really fun opportunity to kind of come full circle after that conversation a couple years ago, to be here with all of you and to hear some of the really exciting conversations that have been going on over the afternoon. So what I want to talk to you about a little bit today is not so much what VF is doing, though I'll kind of highlight a few things. And that's a little bit of an opportunity to talk afterwards. Please feel free to ask me questions. But a little bit about kind of how we're approaching sustainability and how I feel business and sustainability can kind of meld a little bit. So first, VF, and the Dean mentioned a few of the brands, but VF is one of the largest apparel manufacturers in the world. We're a $10 billion company. We own brands like the North Face, Timberland, Vans, Reef, Nautica, JanSport, Wrangler, Lee, Seven. But we also, on the other side of the business, actually have a gigantic uniform business. And I actually didn't know a whole lot about this when I was working at the North Face. But we actually outfit baseball. We own Majestic. Actually, most of your sweatshirts, whether it's at here, University of Maryland, or anywhere else in the country, we actually do all the screen printing and make the sweatshirts. We uniform TSA, American Airlines. After the Super Bowl, when you see the hats and the T-shirts go on in the World Series, we do all of that apparel as well. We also do a lot of hospitality apparel. So the breadth is really large in terms of our supply chain, in terms of our product mix, in terms of our customer and our consumer. We operate in over 75 countries around the world. We produce over 500 million units of products a year get funneled through our supply chain. So it's a very large, complex company, but it's also a fun one. Let's see. Aha. That helps when I turn it on. So, I think most of you are pretty up to speed and pretty fluent in kind of what's going on in the world today and why we're here. So I'm not going to really spend too much time on some of the big challenges that are facing us. You guys know it. It's really your generation who's going to have to deal with some of this mess that's been created over the past 100, 200 years. But as we think about it from a business perspective, it's really about how are we going to produce product in a world with limited resources, and in a world where there's more and more people demanding those resources. And those resources are becoming more imperative to just life, let alone to our products. When we think about water, we think about over 2 billion people a year die of waterborne illnesses. That's actually, think about it, that's almost 13 747s going down every single day that people die of waterborne illnesses. And over 1 billion of those people actually can't even access clean water. And yet our supply chain is demanding more and more water for our products. One brand actually did a big study on how much water it takes to actually supply their supply chain. And they estimated over 2,000 small lakes a year to actually produce their products, one brand. It is estimated that over 1,300 gallons of water are used every time we make a pair of jeans. And that's the whole life cycle of the jeans. So from the start of the cotton and the raw material all the way through your use and the consumer use. So how do we actually make product, use product, when we're going to have 9 billion people on this planet by 2046? How are we going to get fresh water when our water is being polluted by different chemicals? How are we actually going to use that fresh water to actually make our products and to make sure the communities where we live and we work and we actually make our products is available? Climate change, acidification of the oceans, eutrophication, you know all about this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But one of the big things that we look at, really, and one of the big challenges in kind of our world today is this very linear product cycle. It's what we kind of call the cradle to grave cycle. We make product, we use product, and we throw the product away. It's a very, very inefficient use of our resources. In fact, almost 94% of the raw materials that go into a product, and that's not just a pair of jeans, a VF product, a jacket. It could be a computer, it could be your coffee mug, it could be your camera, it could be any product. Almost 94% of those materials are wasted, yet we pay for them. So if you think about it from a business perspective, we're paying for a lot of resources that actually never get used. Think about that lost value there. Think about that waste, that inefficiency in the operations. And then, what a waste, is 80% of the products that we actually purchase get tossed in a few weeks. So think about downstairs in your cafeteria. Think about the grocery store. Think about your shopping bags. Think about what you buy on a daily basis and how much of that actually gets used for the long term. Again, another symptom of waste in our system. So great, thanks, okay. That was depressing. So now what do we do about it? And I really think it's going to be transformational change. And I think what you guys are trying to do here is the start of that. And so it's really, again, it's just phenomenal to see some of the thinking and some of the speakers and the questions that are coming out of this group today. So I really think we need a thinking revolution. We need to change fundamentally how we address our consumption patterns, how we address how we source and use our products. That's the only way we're going to get out of the kind of conundrum that we're in to make sure that 9 billion people in this world have an opportunity to have clean and fresh water, to have, to be able to provide food and clothing for their families. So there's a few ways I'm thinking about how we're going to revolutionize some of our thinking and some things that we've been bringing into VF. The first is learning from nature. So has anyone heard of biomimicry? Great, there's a couple hands going out. The concept with biomimicry is really about, we've spent, at least in my growing up and my schooling, we spent a lot of time learning about nature. Learning about, the systems and the birds and all kinds of stuff. But we really spend very little time learning from nature. And Jean Benyus, who created the concept of biomimicry, she says, listen, nature has been in the practice of R&D, research and design and development, for hundreds of millions of years. It's really been practicing all of this stuff and all of our solutions to all of our problems, whether it's water filtration, energy sourcing, waste disposal. Nature's figured it out. There are no landfills in nature. It's the most efficient system in the world. So how do we learn from nature? Another concept, and many of you may have heard of this, is Bill McDonough's concept about cradle to cradle. So taking the concept of this cradle to grave and saying, well, wait a minute. Let's think about this, because that's not going to work. How do we close that system? How do we actually make those materials and put them back into the system and make them food for the next generation of materials, again, just like nature does it? So thinking about a product that actually can be, so for instance, recycled polyester. That's a really simple one. It comes from PET, water bottles. You make it into a fleece. And when you're done with it, melt it back down and put it back into fiber and make another fleece. Closed loop system. So thinking about whether it doesn't have to be, it can be buildings, it can be processes, it can be products. How do we create those cradle-to-cradle products and systems and thinking where we think, wait a minute, waste, it doesn't go to a landfill. That's money, remember? That's trapped money, that's embodied energy. How do we get it back into our system to use it again? Because we can't keep pulling resources out of the earth when we have 9 billion people anymore. We have to think differently. Timberland, one of our new brands, we actually acquired them back in September, actually has been working on a boot they're calling the Earth Keepers boot, and they are working on a cradle-to-cradle boot. Almost 70% of this boot actually can be recycled, so it can either be melted down or shredded and put into a brand new product. They actually are putting out, has anyone seen the nutrient label? I don't know if anyone's bought a Timberland boot lately, but on all of their boxes, they're actually putting a nutrient label, and it actually tells you how much carbon it takes to make that boot, and actually what type of materials and chemicals are in that boot. And so you, as a consumer, can now start to have an idea of what the impacts are of that boot and start making some decisions. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be the consumer that's actually going to decide whether sustainability works or it doesn't work. We have to inspire new systems. It's hard to imagine what these new systems can look like. You know, they're not always out there. Nature has a lot of them, but it's hard to kind of think through, okay, how does a natural system actually pertain to my business? It's not always, sometimes always logical. So I look at some examples. You may kind of laugh. I'm putting Patagonia up here. It's one of our competitors. But Rick Ridgway right here is a good buddy of mine, and I've got a lot of friends at Patagonia. And I was blown away by this. And I kind of had a feeling it was coming. Rick had been talking a lot about what to do with some of this product that was on eBay anyway. And he said, you know, let's leverage this. He said, this is a good thing. He's like, let's actually partner with eBay and actually get our product sold again and keep reusing it. Let's not recycle it. Let's actually reuse it. Let's rethink how we actually are selling our product and getting our product out to our consumers instead of the traditional, you know, I know some brands who actually shut down their eBay, you know, sites and areas where they're selling product because they don't want the product up there. Where Patagonia is saying, wait a minute, there's a whole new system and saying we need to move our product through its life cycle longer, and eBay is able to do that for us. So new partnerships is key. Bluesign, I don't know if anyone's heard of Bluesign. It's kind of big in the textile industry right now. But Bluesign, actually, the founder of Bluesign created Scholler fabric. If anyone's kind of a techie geek with outdoor products, Scholler is the soft shell fabric that a lot of the jackets are made of. Anyway, the founder spent a lot of time in the supply chain, mostly in Asia, and with a lot of chemicals, and really saw what was happening in China and in Asia, and the stories and the rumors are true. It's messy. It's very chemical intensive. The synthetic products that North Face makes, as well as a lot of the other apparel companies, are chemical based. It's a big chemical soup. And some of those chemicals aren't the greatest ones in the world for the environment. And so Bluesign came in and said, okay, we've got to think differently about this. And so they rate chemicals on 3 levels. Blue, which is basically like green chemistry, so it's pretty benign, it's a decent chemical, go for it, use it as you wish. Gray, which is like, not so crazy about this chemical, but it meets a performance requirement, like waterproof breathableness. And you can use that gray chemical if you actually manage it within a process. So you make sure that doesn't go out in the wastewater, that you actually keep it in a closed loop system. So you just keep using that chemical over and over again, and it never actually gets out into the environment. And then there's black chemicals. And then those are the black, it's really just blacklisted. And they're saying you can't do it. So we brought Bluesign on to North Face about 5 years ago. And we're really excited to say that by 2015, 65% of the North Face materials will be Bluesign certified. Over the past 2 years, once we got them up and running into our mills and factories, we've been able to save millions of gallons of water, millions of kilowatts of energy, and most importantly, really it's the chemicals. We've been able to really go in and look at that chemical soup, look at that recipe, and change the formulas. And really get a lot of those harsh chemicals that we thought we absolutely needed out of our system. We don't put them in the products anymore. And that's huge because unfortunately in Asia, wastewater is mostly not treated. There's very little regulation over wastewater. And most of the chemicals just go right on out to the rivers and out into the ocean. There used to be a joke in the apparel industry that if you wanted to know the next year's color trend, go look at the river colors in China. So it's a huge issue. So I'm really, really excited about what North Face is doing there. And it's really about how do we think differently about the chemistry of our products and how our products are made. And innovate, and I'm sure you guys talk a lot about innovation. It's kind of a hot topic right now. We talk a lot about it at VF, and what does it mean? There's a lot of different kind of ideas around what does innovation mean in terms of products or processes? And I really think about it in terms of how do you bring something new to a business that adds value? And that can be process-oriented or product-oriented, just thinking in general. And I think one of the coolest things, here is, innovation is really the central issue in economic prosperity. And that's directly from a Michael Porter quote. But I think this is what gets me really excited, too, is the idea that, we had all of these, phases or waves of innovation, and sustainability and moving in that sustainability direction is really what's catching on. And I hear it at our company every day, and they're trying to get their heads around it and saying, okay, what does it mean to innovate around sustainability? And that's, I think, where you guys, getting in and out into the business, can really help start framing those conversations and educating people on what does that mean? What would it look like? Inspiring people to start thinking differently. So one of the things that I'm really excited about, and this is kind of a process innovation that will lead hopefully to a lot of product innovation, is some work we've been doing with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, but it was a group that was founded 2 years ago, actually by Patagonia and Walmart. And VF became a founding member of that group. And the idea was to create an index that could start rating our product across all of the apparel. So all apparel would be rated on this tool, on this index, basically apples to apples. So what it does is it mixes up OIA, Outdoor Industry Association. We've founded this tool called the EcoIndex, which is kind of one of the founding tools of the Apparel Coalition. Nike has been working for years on a material assessment tool, so really trying to understand what is inside our materials and our fibers, and getting down to the fiber level, and even the molecular level. And then we merged it and mashed it with social indicators. So we kind of brought these 3 tools together so we could actually look at our products. You can compare one jacket to another jacket, one pair of jeans to another pair of jeans, according to, oops, I hope I took that slide out, sorry, according to the life cycle of the product. So everything from raw materials, what is your raw material, how are you sourcing that raw material, all the way to the manufacturing, how much water, how much energy, what kind of chemicals, what kind of finishing, what kind of dyeing, through transportation, are you air freighting it, are you, shipping it, is it on a train, all the way through retail and into the consumer, and how is the consumer using it? Because what we know with most cotton products, the largest percentage of the environmental impact is actually in the use. So by putting this tool together, we can start to understand where we're falling and start to make actually improvements, because it's actually information, it's knowledge. It starts to give us understanding of, okay, what are the impacts of our products, and where do we start focusing? Because if we don't know what our impacts are, what the hot spots are, it's gonna be really difficult to actually solve those problems. And also what we're trying to do with this tool is actually get it ready to get out to the consumer in a few years. So just like Timberland, and Timberland was key in actually developing this, so just like Timberland has their nutrient label on their box, we actually want to have the EcoIndex label on the box as well. So think of it as like your nutrition label, like you do with food. So then you can actually, as a consumer, look at one pair of jeans and another pair of jeans, and you can start saying, okay, here's this price, here's that price, here's some functional attributes, and here is the environmental attributes. This one used 1,300 gallons of water, and this one only used 600 gallons of water. Okay, well that's gonna start helping, hopefully, drive more sustainable decisions. And also what that's gonna do is start creating an impetus to innovate and to start thinking about, okay, I don't wanna be the brand that has the 1,300 gallons of water in my jeans anymore. So what am I gonna do about it? And there's technologies on the horizon that are actually starting to look at this. We're looking at a technology right now that's waterless dyeing. It actually used compressed CO2 to actually fuse the dye. So compressed CO2 turns into a liquid form. It actually compresses the dye, and then actually, as you release the pressure, it turns back into a gas form, and you actually have your dyed cottons and fibers. So it's literally eliminating water from the dyeing process. And when you look actually at the life cycle of most products, the dyeing process is the most intensive. except for the consumer use, like I mentioned with jeans. So it's driving these kinds of innovations because we have knowledge. We have to have the knowledge in order to get to the innovation. And then one of the last big things that I like to talk about is all this stuff is great. So we have to start thinking differently. We have to disrupt the system. We have to inspire the system. We have to innovate. And we have to partner with new people. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that this isn't a zero-sum game. It isn't going to be you versus me. That's not going to win anymore. That's not the name of the game if we're all going to if we're all going to get better, really, and make sure that more people, the 9 billion people, all have clean, fresh water and healthy food to feed their children. We have to think about how do we create win-win scenarios. And that's really about creating shared value. I don't know if anyone saw the HBR article on shared value. It came out about 2 years ago. Michael Porter wrote it. It's absolutely brilliant. It really kind of shook, I think, a lot of people's foundation in terms of what's business purpose and how can you actually create business value by not actually driving down costs and killing your supplier, basically, on margin. And I'm going to show just 2 concepts that I think are just brilliant around that really exemplify what shared value is. One is from our good friend Ben Packard at Starbucks. Starbucks did an LCA, a life cycle assessment of their coffee, and they realized that their biggest impact was actually at the farm. And traditional coffee is actually incredibly water and chemical intensive. Lots and lots of insecticides, pesticides, fertilizers, because they were pretty much stripping out, mostly in rainforest areas, they were stripping out the rainforests, depleting the soil of all nutrients in planting these coffee plants. So they said, okay, and also, by the way, it also came out at a time where fair trade became big, and they said, listen, we're not paying our farmers enough to live. They're not surviving. Their living wages they're not living wages. So Starbucks said, okay, we've got a challenge here. We've got to figure out a solution. So they brought in some experts from World Wildlife Foundation, and they started really looking at, okay, how is coffee produced and how can we do it differently? And they basically came up with shade-grown coffee. And what shade-grown coffee, actually, it's interesting is you actually don't cut the whole forest down. You actually grow it within the forest. So you actually don't need actually as much water because obviously in a rainforest, you still have a lot of moisture. You have shade that protects the plants. You actually have lots of natural insecticides. You actually have a lot of good, healthy bugs that make sure that the coffee plants, you don't need the pesticides on them. And oh, by the way, with rainforests, the fertilizer is incredibly rich, so you don't actually need the fertilizers. And the beans that then come out of these shade-grown coffee plantations are really high quality. Starbucks is willing to pay a high price for them because consumers are willing to pay a high price for quality coffee. And the farmers are getting paid pretty well now. And so I think this is a really good concept of shared value because everyone wins. It's not the zero-sum game. It's not a race to the bottom. It's not trying to beat your supplier over the head to get a lower price. It's saying, how do we all win in this scenario? How does the supplier and the farmer win from the social standpoint? How does the environment win? And then, how does the business win? I mean, really, if you think about the trifecta of sustainability, I think this is a really, really good example. We're doing quite a bit with a group called BCI. It's the Better Cotton Initiative. It comes out of Europe, and it's kind of similar in thinking to kind of what Starbucks did. And it was really around a challenge because farmers are really challenged with organic cotton. Brands are really challenged with organic cotton. Organic cotton is difficult to produce. It's actually incredibly water intensive. You actually have to lay your fields fallow for 3 years before you do it. That's really hard for farmers. It's a high price, it's expensive. Consumers are not buying a lot of organic cotton. So it's just this big challenge. We tried to do at North Face a couple times 100% organic cotton line. It failed horribly. And everyone's looking at me like, what, are you crazy? And so I was like, okay, something's got to change in here. And so we're looking to partner with BCI. And basically, it's a very similar concept, like I said, with Starbucks. They go into farmers, cotton farmers, and they said, okay, how can we do this better? And it's funny, when you actually go and speak to the farmers, they know the solution. They have it. And most brands and most companies just haven't really asked the right questions. And so really the idea with BCI is actually not so much going to organic and demanding organic, but it's saying, how can we do less bad for our cotton? How can we actually, less pesticides, less fertilizers, and less water? And it's working. And they're showing year over year huge results in terms of the reduction of some of these major toxic chemicals and water issues. And by I think by 2015, at VF, we hope to have about 50% of our entire cotton line BCI certified. And so we're really excited about that. The cotton is actually really good. There are some challenges with the type of fiber. Cotton comes in a lot of different fiber lengths, and different types of products take different fiber length. So that's a little bit of a challenge that we're having to kind of work through. But overall, the farmers are much happier. They're getting paid well. They're not dealing with toxic chemicals. They don't like dealing with those chemicals any more than we want them to be dealing with them. Their environment and their land is much better. They're seeing their land come back. So we're really hoping that this is kind of another good example of where, again, we create these win-win situations for everyone. So I'm just going to leave you with a couple thoughts. Really, it's about your opportunity and what you, as this generation of really smart, young, passionate people, can do. And it's really, you guys have seen some of this, but I'm inspired by it day in, day out. And it's really about challenging people to think differently. It's about coming to conferences and meetings and meeting interesting people who are doing cool things, who challenge your thinking, because we have to start thinking differently. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again because it's not working anymore. And so Melissa kind of mentioned it earlier too about, this is a room full of change agents. I really encourage you to get out and to push the limits, because really I think every single social and environmental challenge out there is absolutely an opportunity, hands down. There is so much white space out there, and you're seeing some of these people. I'm seeing some of these entrepreneurs who have been speaking. They're taking advantage of it, and they're making money. They're having a livelihood, and I think that's really great. We should be able to do that. That's the whole, impetus of this. So with that, I leave you with one of my favorite places in the world, Switzerland. It's a bold landscape, and so I leave you with some thoughts around you be bold. You be brilliant. You think about how you can go out into the world and change it, ask questions, think differently, challenge other people to think differently. Don't be afraid to say something's not right and to go fix it. You guys are the ones who are going to do it. So thanks a lot. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So with our remaining 15 minutes, you can have a seat there. Letitia and I are going to do a short discussion and have a chance for you in the audience to also ask her questions. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, I'd like you to, there's 2 microphones you can see in the middle of the room here. Just come up and line up. We'll even be able to take a couple of questions. So if you have one that you want to ask her, please line up so I can start to do that. So let's start with one here. Thank you so much for those great words. And I use both those quotes in my classes, so they're fabulous. You talked a little bit about several new models, and Cradle to Cradle being one of them, and this interest in companies looking at their entire supply chain. Tell us a little bit contextually about why that's happening. What has shifted or changed for firms to move from just an internal-oriented position in their own production and sales and marketing to this more perspective of how products are supplied all the way back to the very early raw materials to the consumer use?
That's a big question. There's a lot of different reasons, I think. One, at the end of the day, it's about costs. I think people are really starting to see costs influencing business decisions. Cotton, I don't know if anyone watches cotton, but about 6 years ago, cotton just went through the roof in terms of pricing, and people said, oh, well, wait a minute. We can't handle this. We can't handle this in our margins. Something has to change. Oil, especially for some of our businesses, we're very, chemical, petro-based. Apparel industry, its performance products is based on petro. And when oil fluctuates, our margins fluctuate. So we need to be able to get a handle on that. The volatility of those resources is really not good for our business. You're seeing more awareness. So you're seeing a lot of businesses really doing LCAs, life cycle assessments. They're having experts come in and say, hey, did you know A, B, and C about your product? And most people didn't know. I mean, people in business are really, really busy, and they don't mean to do harm. That's not the intent. It's just they're busy, and they don't always understand the impacts of their decisions. So as we start to educate them, they start thinking, oh, okay, that's not good. We need to change it. NGOs. NGOs have been a big impetus in terms of, I think, businesses really changing their business practices and requiring businesses to be more transparent about their supply chain and really about taking responsibility of their whole entire supply chain, from the raw materials on and the chain of custody of those raw materials. And frankly, a lot of VF buys the final product. We buy a jacket. We don't buy zippers. We don't buy Velcro. We don't buy, cotton. We buy jeans and we buy jackets. And so it's a supplier after supplier after supplier after supplier buying all of those materials. And we don't always necessarily ask the right questions. And so it's now saying, okay, actually we are responsible for every single piece of our product. And now it's kind of saying, okay, how do you get your head around that then?
Right.
So
definitely a current issue is how do you monitor the performance of the supplier of the supplier of the supplier? Are there some current trends that you're seeing in terms of efforts to standardize that, or ways in which you're able to influence so far deep into your supply chain?
Well, I think that with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, that's going to be one tool to do that. And so we piloted that with 10 of our brands, 13 products over the fall. And so it was really interesting because we actually learned a lot about our supply chain that we didn't know. Sure. We were like, oh, you were sourcing your zippers from there? Well, we actually asked you to source them from somewhere else. So it's really good because, like I said, the supply chain is very complex, but there are tools coming out to do that. There are groups. NRDC is a great group. EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, they're actually starting to get out there and really trying to help businesses as well improve the transparency. There's efforts. There's not enough, but we're getting there.
Good, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go to one question from the audience.
Thank you, Mrs. Webster. So thanks for being here. Thanks for everything you do. I believe in what you're doing, but I have two questions. One is, what type of market research have you done and has VF done to sort of find out what consumers really want around this, and if it really is a big demand? And secondly, some of the processes you talked about, what about product testing? Are the products performing the same way that the standardized products have? Thanks.
Yeah, so a couple different ways to approach it. One, we have done a number of research studies, and it's kind of all over the ballpark, to be honest. And it's one of those things where the consumers want to do good, and they say, yes, we will buy, but they don't. And so it's frustrating, because I get this research, and I say, look, brand A, B, or C, they're going to buy. And they said, we make it, and they don't buy it. Because mostly, one, it's price. Consumers not willing to spend more for sustainability. It's very, very few customers are willing to do it. And so what we've actually started to do is think about, okay, how does sustainability and performance work together? Okay. And that's really where we're getting into the product testing, where we're saying, listen, sustainability and performance actually are not discrete. They actually need to support each other. And so we're actually finding that some products that we're actually working on and we're testing are actually performing better. So our 100% recycled Polartec fleece actually is more breathable. People actually like it. The feel of it actually is better. So we're actually starting to do some product testing and trying to actually get our sustainable products to a place where all attributes, all functional attributes are actually the same. And oh, by the way, it's actually environmentally friendly. So it has to be just kind of one of those things you just bring in, you have to figure out how to do it. And you can't charge more for it because really the consumer's not paying for it.
Excellent. Okay, great. Go ahead. Question here.
Yes. So I commend your efforts to provide more information for the consumer. I think that's really great. But do we really have like a moral problem? Like you made the joke earlier about the ink in the rivers in China, right? Like you can't do that in the US, okay? We have labor laws. We're not gonna put like, with the recent incident with Apple, we're not gonna put things there so that people don't jump out of the windows. Should we as Americans and folks be buying products that are against our own values? When we know, you may not know what they're doing in China, but you know that they don't have the same laws as we do. So is this a moral problem or is it an information problem?
I think it's both. I just read actually in an article in a magazine coming up here that the federal government is thinking, there was a proposal that the EPA should be regulating all imported product, just as much as they regulate product or manufacturing like they do in the US. Of course, that's never really gonna fly. It's really hard. It's really hard because I think a lot of brands try and say, and especially NGOs, I mean, look at Greenpeace. They try and say, look at you guys, look at what you're buying, look at what these brands are doing, look at what these manufacturers are doing in China. They're polluting the environment. They're not treating people fairly. Stop buying this product. The consumers aren't stopping buying the product. Consumers have to make the decision, morally, I agree, with their pocketbooks. They have to do it. Because at the end of the day, and I fully, I'm not trying to say corporations should not take responsibility. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But the consumer has to be willing to put a stake in the ground as well and say, I am not going to buy a brand that is going to do this to the environment or to treat people unfairly. I am going to buy from a brand that is, doing the right things, is on the right side of the moral decision and the moral compass. So it's really hard. It's really hard when, at the end of the day, consumers aren't willing to spend. They're not making the decisions that, Greenpeace is, trying to do this big thing right now around toxics. And they thought, we're going to come out around toxics and consumers will never buy Nike and Adidas and H&M again. It's not happening. And on the other side of the coin is shareholders are saying, you better keep producing at the lowest cost, and you better keep producing, your product at the highest margin. So it's both. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. I don't think I'm answering your question at all, but I struggle with exactly what you're talking about every day. So I feel for you.
Thank you.
Is there a role, following up on, that government should be playing or that businesses are expecting to help incentivize firms to change behaviors? I mean, traditionally, you look at firms focused on profit maximization for shareholders, and government's job is to regulate them to make sure they do no harm, which is a flawed system. It's not been working correctly, right? So what is it that you're seeing at your firm or your fellow business folks in terms of what they want to see from government or what the role that government can play in helping to push some of these items forward?
I think at the end of the day, it's tough. I think at the end of the day, everyone's looking for a level playing field. And I think a level playing field as well as complete understanding of what the rules of the game are. And in the US, you know it for the most part. You know what the EPA requires, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, OSHA. For the most part, you know what you're going to get. But you go over to China, you go to Thailand, to Taiwan, to South Korea, to India, to wherever it is, and the rules are all over the place, and companies can kind of do whatever they want. And so the US is kind of hamstrung, in terms of, or even Europe is kind of saying, okay, well, what do we do? How do we manage this? How do we regulate this? And if you put too much regulation on, well, then we are at a disadvantage. And it's a really complicated question, but I think at the end of the day, they want a level playing field and they want to know what the rules of the road are. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier around carbon, and that's a big, topic of discussion as around, should we price carbon? Should we regulate carbon? And I say yes, and I say definitely yes, because then we actually can eliminate some of the volatility in the pricing, and we can actually, plan accordingly against it. Right now, we're just hedging all kinds of numbers, and it's really tough for business continuity. So I think government can play a part in it for sure.
Great. Okay, question here.
You've discussed NGOs a little bit, but can you talk about how your company decides to work with different NGOs? Is it the loudest NGO you decide to work with, or how do you find the right person to partner with, to develop sustainable cotton or so forth?
Sure. I think, NGO engagement, stakeholder engagement is absolutely imperative for any business. I think one thing is they shed a light oftentimes on stuff you're not aware of. Again, people in the supply chain, and I worked at an NGO for a long time, and I was definitely kind of on the maybe not such a fan of business at times. But getting inside kind of the beast, you start to understand the constraints and the challenges that a lot of these people have. And when I sit down and talk to people in the supply chain or in product development, they care deeply about this, but everyone's just maxed to the nth degree, and they don't have time to often look at some of the issues. And so NGOs kind of shine that light. They put the mirror on, hey, did you know this is happening in your supply chain? Did you know this was going on? And I think that's really good. I think we need NGOs to actually be out there in the field and helping us understand, one, what are the challenges and what are the issues we're dealing with, but two, also help us solve them. We can't do it on our own. No one can do it on our own. And a lot of the NGOs are working with other businesses out there who are doing it, and so they can share those learnings. So I mentioned NRDC and EDF and World Wildlife Fund and some of those. There's a lot of other ones out there who are doing some really phenomenal work on really trying to get overall the supply chain to a better place. And those are the people we like working with because they understand some of the business constraints and challenges we're up against, and they're going to challenge us and push us to do better, but they also come with some solutions. They also kind of say, hey, let's do this together. So it's a win-win.
Thank you.
Okay, one more question, then I have one to wrap up.
Okay. My question kind of goes along with my man in the brown suit. It's about with improvement in sustainability and technology. Are you also improving with fair trade, or are you kind of forgetting about that in general?
Fair trade's incredibly important, and our social compliance work is absolutely one of the most important things I think we do. I didn't bring up a lot of the social side of things, because I think VF does a pretty good job at that. We have a huge audit team. We have really strong social compliance program. And so we go into all of our facilities, tier 1, and starting to get into tier 2, so a lot of our mills, to make sure actually they meet a certain requirement and regulation. And we work with WRAP, World Responsibility. Oh, I just totally forgot it. What WRAP is. I should know this. And a number of other FLA, a number of other groups to actually make sure our factories are up to par. I think when you're getting into fair trade, you're starting to talk about living wages. That starts to get into a really tough discussion. We grapple with living wages day in, day out. And so that's kind of an unended or open conversation that all brands are kind of having in terms of what is a living wage. We always pay minimum wage. That's hands down. That's absolute policy. But sometimes, sometimes minimum wage is not always a living wage. But it is absolutely a crucial part of our business.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions. Okay, so one last question. So in your role as Director of Global Sustainability, you have a fairly small team, but a lot of responsibility. So here you have a group of rising generation who are going to come into the workforce. What is your advice? Some may want to choose to go into this kind of role, in a sustainability role, but many of us will just be in core functions, whether in finance or marketing or operations. What is your advice? How do these students engage in the issues and become critical change agents within their company? Any specific words of advice?
Yeah, we actually talked a little bit about this at kind of the fishbowl. And I actually think it's almost more important for people who are passionate and care about sustainability and these issues to get actually out into other functional areas and to actually be the change agent and kind of the underground sleuth and kind of the black ops out there who are actually changing it from the inside. Because at the end of the day, whether it's me or someone on my team, sustainability can't do it all. I mean, I can't be everywhere in every place, touching finance or marketing or, strategy or operations or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's people actually in those roles who actually make decisions every single day that actually can make the change. And it really is every decision you make makes a difference. Right. And that's the key, actually, is I think you guys have the potential, whether it doesn't matter what roles you take, and from finance to design, you can make a difference. And I think that's really the coolest thing about this, is you can be a change agent, and no matter what you do.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Letitia,
Yeah.
for those words. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.